Hi friends! My name's Jordan and you're watching Criminal Craft.
Trying to find some balance in my life. I never really put up a fight. And now I'm
Hi everyone! Thank you for coming back to my channel. If you're new here, make sure that you click subscribe so you can get notified every time that I post a new video. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you for coming back. It means the world to me that you would take any part of your day to listen to my videos. Here on Criminal Crafting, we talk about true crime, court cases, missing persons, you name it, we talk about it. We also craft. We have a small crafting business. If you would like to shop our website, down in the description, our website is there. We do make crafting videos, but we're kind of trying to figure out where we want to go with that and whether we want to put crafting on its own separate channel. So if you have any suggestions, if you like having the crafting videos on this channel, let me know in the comments section down below. Today's case, guys, is more of the Gabby Petito case. So we just found out that the Petitos won the lawsuit, but right after they had gone to trial, Bertolino, the Laundrie's lawyer, had done some interviews, and he did an interview with Brian Entin from News Nation. And if you don't follow Brian Entin, you guys go follow him. He's one of the best newscasters I've ever watched. I love him. I followed him from the Gabby Petito case, and he always has everything on his Twitter. So if I need to find out something, I go straight to his Twitter. But he's so wonderful. He'll do lives and things like that on his Twitter, and it's fun to be able to go on and talk to him about it. And during the Gabby Petito case, he was on all the time. So it was like almost every night we got an update from him. He's just a wonderful investigative journalist. So I watched many interviews of Bertolino, but this one was different. And the reason it was different, I feel like, because Brian challenged Bertolino, where some of the other ones tried to stay neutral, and I understand that, but I feel like Brian Entin was there from the beginning. He knew everything about the case. He was there on the Laundrie's property. So I just feel like he feels how we all feel in this community about it all. So I wanted to watch his, and I'm going to play some clips throughout so you can see what they say and kind of see the heated discussions. I don't feel like me telling you is enough. Let's get into it. Brian Entin, in the beginning of the interview, asks Bertolino, did the Laundries know Gabby was dead and where she was when the Petitos were reaching out to them? And you guys, Bertolino, Brian Entin essentially asked him twice the same question, and Bertolino kind of skirted around the answer, didn't really answer the question, and Brian Entin finally said, "You're not denying it," and then he kind of skirts around it. So I feel like Brian felt in that he never denied that the Laundries knew where Gabby was and where her body was and that she was dead. He just skirted around, squirmed around. I mean, he just avoided answering the question. And that's his job. It's what he's supposed to do with his clients. I get it. But I just feel like we're so far into this, you really can't just come up with an answer. It's a little frustrating, to say the least. So take a look at this part of the interview.
The first thing I want to ask you is, in this lawsuit, it says in black and white that the Laundries knew that Gabby Petito was dead while this search was happening and that they didn't tell anyone, but that they knew. Did the Laundries know that Gabby Petito was dead during that time?
What I can tell you is, with respect to the motion to dismiss that we filed, we have to deem all of the allegations contained in the complaint as true. So for purposes of what happened today in the hearing, the judge has to assume that those allegations are true. What Chris and Roberta knew and what I knew at that time, is not for me to speak of right now, because it's the crux of the lawsuit that's pending right now, and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment. However, on the aspect of the motion to dismiss, assuming all of those allegations are true, it doesn't really make much of a difference. What I knew, or what Chris and Roberta knew, we did not have to disclose to any third party, and specifically to law enforcement or the Petito family.
And I understand what you're saying, Mr. Bertolino. In the hearing today, the way the law works, it has to be assumed that everything in the lawsuit is true. But, I was out there. People were searching. You had law enforcement all over the country. I mean, you know how this case was. You had the entire country searching for Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie at one point. And it sounds like you will not deny that the Laundries knew, that they knew something.
What I had said months ago, Brian, was that I don't know exactly what Brian had said to his parents. I had said publicly, perhaps even on this particular show, that what Brian told me was privileged. I was not going to share it. I had conversations with Brian. I had conversations with Chris and Roberta. I had conversations with them separately, and I had conversations with them together. So it's not for me to comment at this point in time what Chris and Roberta knew. I can tell you what I knew. I can maybe perhaps someday tell you what Brian knew, but none of that's going to happen tonight on this show.
So next, Brian Entin talks about the Laundries and how they essentially showed no emotion in any of the filming that we saw of them, in any of the reports, anywhere they went. They didn't show any emotion, and for me that was weird, because I feel like if I was the parent of my son being gone and my son's fiance being gone, I wouldn't be in a good place. And of course, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors. Maybe they were a mess behind closed doors. We just don't know. They just didn't show any emotion. And I think that's a lot of why they've gotten the rep that they've gotten. They could have come forward and pleaded to find Brian. They could have come forward and pleaded to find Gabby. They didn't do those things. So I understand why Brian asks the question. And this is what Bertolino says.
You mentioned that I was there. I was outside the house for a long time watching your clients come and go, along with a lot of other media. And when Brian Laundrie was missing, one thing that always struck me was that Chris and Roberta didn't seem especially emotional. They weren't, pleading with the media to help find him. And once he was located by them and we learned that he committed suicide, I've always wondered, Mr. Bertolino, did his parents know that he committed suicide? Did they know all of that time, and that is why they didn't appear so emotional, and that is why they didn't, come out to the media and beg for help?
Well, Brian, what I've said in the past is, rhetorically, what did people expect them to do? They knew Brian went into the preserve. I said at one point that he left, he was distraught. I made mention that, Chris said to me, he wished he could have prevented Brian from going, but he knew he couldn't stop him. They were concerned about their son's well-being when he went hiking in the preserve and when he was home the entire time. With that being said, they were somber, they were quiet, and I can tell you they were very upset and very emotional with me. But when you've got a gaggle of press and screaming public out at your door 24 hours a day, Did you think that Brian and Roberta were going to go down to Walmart and start putting up signs, help me find my son? They knew where their son was. They knew where he went. We said it. And as it turns out, unfortunately, we were correct. Brian never left the preserve. And I certainly think law enforcement knew that all along as well. And that's why, some people in the press and the public questioned whether Chris and Roberta should have done more. But what more could they have really done when you had all that law enforcement manpower searching?
Well, let me interrupt you, Mr. Bertolino. You're saying what more could they have done? But I mean, just honestly, I mean, it seems like they really did nothing. I mean, they stayed in the house. Their son was missing. Gabby was missing. Their son's fiance. They didn't really do anything at all, did they?
Well, again, you tell me, Brian, what should they have done? Did you want them to go to Walmart and hang up a sign? The entire country. Couldn't they have
come outside and pleaded? Couldn't they have come outside and pleaded with the world? If you know where Gabby is, come forward. If you know where Brian is, come forward. I mean, why couldn't they have done that?
Well, I think you just misspoke, and I know you corrected yourself, and you're saying, where could you tell us where Brian is? They knew where Brian was. It wasn't a question. The only people that were speculating that Brian was somewhere other than the preserve was the press and the public. So what is the point in pleading something when you know the answer?
He said in his interview, when he talked about this, that Brian was grieving and eventually tried to skirt around it and pretend like he hadn't said Brian was grieving. But that in and of itself tells us that they knew that Brian murdered Gabby. The fact that he said Brian was grieving says all of them knew. And even in this interview, Bertolino makes a comment about him not knowing all of the things at a certain point, but at that point, he knew Brian was grieving. And the parents called right after Brian called them and told them. It had to have been concerning enough for them to retain their lawyer, right? That's what makes sense to me. But maybe I'm way off base. During the videos, he's talking about the Laundrie's not showing emotion and showing emotion to him, but not showing emotion to the public. He says, what more could they have done? And he says it several times, and Brian Entin cuts him off and says they could have come out and spoke, pleaded to find their son, pleaded to find Gabby. They didn't have to come out and out their son. They could have acted like they cared about Gabby and Brian. And that's what I feel like is the biggest issue of it all. They did not act like they cared about either of them. So I understand why Brian Entin cut him off, because I think we all feel that way. Most of us feel that way who's followed this case. Brian talks about how Bertolino kept the Laundries out of trouble, which, by telling them to be silent, he essentially did. If there was anything that could have implicated them, that explains why Bertolino told them not to say anything. But they stayed out of trouble by having them stay silent, and he asks if they regret anything. And Bertolino says during his response that they have no regrets in how they handled the situation. I bet that Bertolino has some regrets now that he's put out a statement that made it so it's going to trial. He had to have some regrets.
Let me ask you this, Mr. Bertolino. You've obviously been giving the Laundrie's legal advice through this whole process. A lot of people would say from a legal perspective, you've given them very good advice because they haven't been in trouble so far, in any sort of criminal trouble, and you've kept them out of trouble. But do you have any regrets, I mean, along the way? Do you think you should have had them talk to the media or perhaps seem a little more human, even though you protected them legally? Do you think you made any mistakes along the way, since now they are really in many ways just, it seems like hated by the world?
Hated is one word, vilified is another. But in the end, Brian, you asked a very good question. It's emotional for me. It's emotional for Chris and Roberta because we are friends. They did lose a child. They lost a young man that I knew since he was born. And yeah, that's upsetting. But I'll tell you what I told the FBI when they left my office the last day and said, well, Brian's dead now. And I told them, look at me. I did everything the right way. We have no regrets. The parents did everything the right way, and they have no regrets. Brian, what you have to understand is that Brian Laundrie was a grown man. He was a young man, but he made his decisions, and we had to abide, especially myself as his attorney at that time. We had to abide, and I had to abide by the decisions that Brian was making. And with that in mind, we made every possible step that we thought was good at the time, with the consultation of Brian involved in that. And there were some things that we certainly can look back and say, what if? And Chris and Roberta and I had that conversation just today after this hearing. And I had to remind them of certain situations and certain conversations that were had. And we all circled back to, yes, we are very comfortable with the decisions we made. We're not happy that Brian is gone. We're not happy that Gabby is gone, but I don't think we could have prevented either one of those.
My thing with the regrets thing is, he said they couldn't have prevented either Gabby's or Brian's death. And while I agree they probably couldn't have prevented Gabby's death, they could have prevented Brian's. And I get that he's a grown man and he made his own decisions and they weren't great decisions. But as a mom, the second my child went out to that reserve, I would have had the police out there. The least you could have done was tried to get him some help. Even if in the end that's what ended up happening, at least you did everything you could to save your child. And I've gone through this a lot and thought, maybe the Laundries, and this is all alleged, this is all my opinion, maybe the Laundries didn't want him to go to prison. Maybe for them, that was the only way out. Which for me, I get not wanting to have to visit your child in prison. I can't imagine all of that. They probably didn't want to go through all the court cases that they're going through now. It's not like they avoided those court cases, but it would have been drawn out for years. And so I understand to an extent that side of things, but I would rather have my child alive. And maybe not all parents feel that way, and that's okay. We can have differing opinions, but I'd rather my child stay alive and me be able to visit him in prison than not visit him at all. I don't know. Maybe once my kid was in there, maybe I would change my opinion on things, but I just feel like there was something they could have done in Brian's situation. I feel like had they called the police and had conversations with the police, they don't have to rat him out. They don't have to tell him anything. Just that he was having a hard time and going to the reserve with a... Maybe the police could have gone out there and got him some help that he needed. That he obviously needed. Brian asked if the Laundries wanted to speak out. And this is what they said.
Do Chris and Roberta want to speak out at some point? I mean, when this civil lawsuit is over, at some point, do they want to share their story?
The answer to that is they were close. I mean, there was a long time they were angry. They were angry for many reasons. They were angry for the people outside of their home. They were angry for people not understanding that this was not their doing, that they lost a child, that they're suffering too. They were, lightening up a little bit from that anger perspective. And, there may have been a point in time where communications could have had taken place. And now we're back into, we'll say, round 2 or round 3 with the Petito family. And somebody asked me earlier on a program, if there was a sit down, a 4-way, if you will, of the two families, could this be resolved? And my response to that was, the only thing that the Petito family has done as far as communication is thrown out Twitters and thrown out letters to the public. Not once.
But come on, Mr. Bertolino, though. For you to listen, we're not going to go after the Petitos. I mean, come on. I mean, we know what they've gone through.
You're asking me.
We're not. Yeah.
You're asking Brian. You're asking me.
No, but they can tweet what they want.
Resolution. Could there be conversations? There has never been an olive branch reached out to our side. The only thing that's been out.
But why is it there? I mean, their daughter was murdered by their son. Their daughter was murdered by the Laundrie son. Why would they be the ones to put out an olive branch? I mean, I think we're just going to disagree on that point.
So during this portion, Bertolino starts making accusations about the Petitos and saying that they never extended an olive branch. Then all they did was tweet about things. And Brian Entin was very quick to shut it down and said, no, leave them alone. They can do what they want. They lost their daughter at the hands of your son. They shouldn't have to extend an olive branch. You should do that. But in going back to some of the stuff that we talked about earlier, the Petitos did write, I believe it was in one of my other videos, but the Petitos did write a letter begging the Laundries to talk to them. They weren't begging the Laundries to go to the police or to rat their son out. They just were begging the Laundries to give them any indication of where Gabby was. To me, that was an olive branch. They did extend an olive branch. You guys told her to reach out to your attorney, and your attorney told them no comment. So I feel like Brian, in that, had the right to cut him off, and he said, we're just going to agree to disagree. And then he ended the portion with Bertolino, and I can't say I blame him. He seemed like he was getting pretty upset about it. So, this next part of the interview was Mr. Riley, the Petito's lawyer, and it was a short and sweet interview, but Brian asked him about some of the accusations and asked if they have evidence to back up their claims. So he was essentially asking, there's all this evidence that they keep talking about against the Laundries that we haven't seen yet, and he asked him if he could back up those claims. And I'm going to show that part of the video here.
Some of the allegations in your lawsuit, Mr. Riley, are pretty explosive. That Brian told his parents that he killed Gabby early on, and even when the search was happening, that the Laundries knew. But there hasn't been any proof to back that up. Do you have the proof to back that up?
Well, the proof, this isn't the time for the proof because it's a motion to dismiss, but yes, we have the proof. And I think...
And can you tell us anything now? I mean, because...
Well, you can look at the allegations of the complaint, and circumstantial evidence is as strong as direct evidence. The belief is that Gabby was killed on August 27th of 2021. The very next day, Brian Laundrie contacted his parents, and the minute his parents got off the phone with Brian Laundrie, they contacted attorney Bertolino. Circumstantially, what does that tell you? That tells you Brian must have told them something that was concerning enough that they had to call an attorney to have a conversation. And we know that the FBI did a significant investigation in this case. And we will produce the evidence when the time comes.
You guys, just the circumstantial evidence is damning in and of itself. They called the lawyer right after talking to Brian. Right after. And they sent money 2 days later. If that doesn't scream that they knew, I don't know what else would. So he's saying the circumstantial evidence, just the timeline in and of itself, is telling enough. But he did say they have evidence to prove that. So I'm really interested to hear what that evidence is. You wouldn't contact your lawyer unless you're concerned, right? I thought this was an interesting part of the interview where he said they took a trip to Fort DeSoto, which we all knew about, but then he said they took other trips and they're hoping that that all comes to light. What? Oh my gosh. So is he saying they took other trips in between Brian coming home? Did they go meet Brian? What did they do? Just as he said that, I was like freaking out. Because they did Fort DeSoto. Maybe there were a few days where they were home. I mean, there was a day when they were home that Brian was mowing the lawn. Maybe they took more trips within that we don't know about, and we only found out about the Fort DeSoto one because of Dog the Bounty Hunter. Who knows? But it's just been going over in my head. What are they talking about? What are they talking about? So hopefully we find out soon.
But to focus simply on the fact that they remain silent ignores all of the other proof in this case that leads to our claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress. It wasn't just remaining silent. It was going on vacation, basically thumbing their nose at the Petito family saying, we know Gabby's not here, but Brian's back. And by the way, Brian drove Gabby's van back. We're not going to talk to you. We're going to go on with our life as though nothing happened. And we're going to go on vacation with our family to DeSoto Park. And they took other trips that I believe will be shown in the future with Brian.
Mr. Riley also says the information that the FBI will be eye-opening. That means there's a lot of other stuff that we don't know. I am so selfishly waiting for that evidence. I want to know what the FBI has. I would assume Roberta's letter is part of that, part of what he's referring to, but it sounds like there's more. I don't imagine it's great for the Laundries. In my own opinion, I don't believe it's great, or we probably would have heard it already.
Will we get some of this information? Will we get answers? Is there another avenue, or is that the end?
Well, if the judge dismisses it, we may appeal it. We'll have to talk about what our options are, but certainly a freedom of information request could be made for the information that the FBI has, and it will be eye-opening.
But what do you guys think about this whole interview? What do you think about Bertolino's comments? What do you think about Mr. Riley's comments? You know, I don't wish ill on the Laundries. I just feel like what they did and how they handled things definitely wasn't the right thing to do. And I do agree with Brian Entin in that they could have come out and pleaded to find their son. They could have come out and pleaded to find Gabby. They could have gone out with the FBI right in the beginning, knowing all of Brian's favorite places. They didn't. They waited a month and let them do it and spend millions of dollars. I think, to me, that is one of the big things, especially when Bertolino's saying, what more could they have done? You made these people search for a month when you knew all of the little spots that Brian loved. So why didn't you search with them the whole time so they found him in a week versus a month? But, you know, it all played out how it played out. And Maybe once we get all the evidence from everything that the Laundries had in it, maybe we'll feel differently. But until then, that's how I feel about the whole situation. So, make sure that you like this video. It really helps me out. Comment down below your thoughts. I want to know what you guys think. I love talking to you guys in the comments. And make sure to subscribe so I can continue doing this. This is something I truly love. And I want to be able to continue doing it and get videos out way more often than I have been. And until next time, I'll see you later. Bye.
And now I'm losing sleep. What if I lost touch? What if I'll never get it right? I try to follow my heart, but I lost it somehow. Wish that someone could say it'll all be okay. Just listen to me as I say. Listen to me as I